Hey Amarillo, I'm Jason Boyett, and you're listening to Hey Amarillo, the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. As part of this podcast partnership with Brick & Elm magazine, I want to give a podcast shout out to Glass Doctor of Amarillo, Sprouse Schrader Smith, attorneys at law, and Wittenberg Law Firm. Get the September-October issue of Brick & Elm online at brickandelm.com and at a variety of locations in town, including Burrowing Owl Books, Barnes & Noble, and the new United Market Street at Coulter and the Loop. Today's guest is Tom Martin. Tom is the CEO of Milo Insulation. He lives here in Amarillo, but his company operates a manufacturing plant in Tulia that processes sorghum into a loose-fill attic insulation product called MILEX. And stay with me. MILEX is made from grain sorghum that's grown in farms here in the Texas Panhandle as an alternative to traditional insulation materials. And this business started locally, but it has expanded across Texas and into Oklahoma with national ambitions. Tom invented the product several decades ago, but that's not the only interesting part of his story, which includes a college on wheels, a teaching career, and biodegradable packing peanuts. In fact, if you've received a package containing packing peanuts over the past 20 years, you've already seen some of Tom's products. So here's Tom Martin. Tom Martin, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you. I want to talk a little bit about your business and why it's here in this area and the history of that. But before we get to that point, I like to ask my guests, what brought you to the Panhandle in the first place? So tell me your story. I know you're not originally from here.
Well, actually, I'm a native Texan. I was born in McAllen.
Okay. But still not quite the Panhandle, though, right?
Not quite the Panhandle. I grew up on a farm in Iowa because my father transferred from Mission, Texas to Fort Dodge, Iowa in 1951.
All right.
So I grew up on a farm in Iowa, taught school in Iowa and Minnesota. This Texas boy never did warm up, Jason. As soon as I was out of education, I came back south.
It's a fairly different climate between Iowa and especially like McAllen, right?
Especially Mission in January and Fort Dodge in January. It was a difference of 75 plus to 20 below on that day.
How long were you in Iowa before you came back?
Well, we moved to Iowa in 51. I came back in 76.
Okay.
Long time.
Long enough to kind of grow up there. You went to school.
I grew up there, went to school there. Iowa's a pleasant place. I don't care for the climate.
Okay.
Like I said, never warmed up. But when I was teaching school, Iowa was a very good place to teach school. Very good.
Is that what you wanted to do? You wanted to teach initially?
Well, I tell you what, I grew up on a farm. My father was a farmer, and frankly, I got a little burned out on farming with that 5 o'clock in the morning before the sun comes up, and then 9 o'clock at night when we sit around the dinner table and my father tries to figure out why we didn't get everything done we'd planned for the day. Yeah. I got burned out.
What kind of farming was it?
It was, well, in those days, that's when there was a farm, maybe 4 on a quarter. Mm-hmm. We had pigs, we had sheep, we had cattle, we had mama cows, we raised our own calves, we fed them our own corn. We grew corn and soybeans and alfalfa hay. So it was that kind of a farm. That part of Iowa is very rough, a lot of lowland, a lot of trees and bushes and bottom fields, none of which are square anywhere.
Okay.
But I enjoyed that, and that's the way I grew up. But in high school, I decided I wanted to be in the diplomatic corps. I love history. I love traveling. I'm going to be a diplomat. Well, by the time you're a sophomore in college, it dawns on you that a beginning diplomat doesn't get Paris and London, Jason.
That's probably true.
He gets out of Mongolia, where you learn a lesson or a language that you're never going to use again.
Yeah.
So then what do you do with a political science degree? Well, you become a lawyer or you teach. So I decided, lesser of the two evils there, I decided I would teach. So I double majored and took education and political science, started teaching history. So I started teaching in junior high, and my last teaching assignment was in Minnesota, in Minnesota State University. Then it was time to go south when I got out of education.
Did you enjoy education?
I did enjoy. I enjoyed teaching. When the classroom got a little too confined for me, I'm a little bit too, I don't like that stop 29 minutes and let's run and have lunch for 17 and come back. So in middle of 1974, I started a private school, I went into Chicago and bought an old Greyhound bus that was built back in 1955, double-decker, 10-wheel bus, and converted it into a mobile classroom. And then I went around to local universities talking to department heads and tried to convince department heads to offer credit for extended field trips. Then I signed up students and circumnavigated North America. Ended up in the Panama Canal Zone and came back in a 3-month expedition, and the kids got college credit for it.
Where'd that idea come from?
Well,
you seen somebody
tell you
else
where the idea
that?
came from. I'm very lucky. In 1970, I was a graduate student on what's called World Campus Afloat, which is a university that operates out of Chapman College, Orange, California, and sails around the world while you study.
Okay.
And it's a conglomerate of universities. My professors were from LSU, and the professors were semester at a time, just like the students were. We left from Long Beach, California, and almost 4 months later, we were in New York and went around.
And you got college credit for it?
You got college credit
classes.
for it, yes. I got graduate credit, but most of the kids were undergraduates. And I fell in love with that idea. And I thought, well, if you can do it on the ocean, why can't you do it on land?
Sure.
So for 4 years, I did that, take private school kids all the way to Panama. Sometimes we made Panama, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes it's earthquakes, sometimes it's revolutions.
Some of those roads you don't want to be driving a double-decker boat.
This was in the mid-'70s. I mean, we were never endangered because we weren't the enemy of anybody. We did run into rebels. We ran into government troops. But like I said, everybody was very friendly. We got Wi-Fi.
It's so interesting. Does that model still exist in some capacity?
It would be very difficult to do today, and insurance would be the reason.
Yeah.
This was affordable. We lived off the land. I'm talking about, I think the first trip cost the students $980 plus their tuition. And that was food, transportation, and everything. But we cooked our own meals. We did our laundry with the women in the streams and in the rivers. We stopped in the local market and got our food, cooked it ourselves. And we avoided most of the major cities.
Yeah.
It was mostly a rural trip, Mexico City being an exception.
I mean, even apart from curriculum, that seems like a real learning environment.
Well, there's a lot of kids in the 4-year college that, it gets tiresome. And you just want a break. And a break that gives you credit is a good way to take a break. Mostly what would happen is a student would come to me, I'd put an ad in the paper and park the bus along the street in the university campus. And student come to me, I'd like to have some experience traveling. Well, let's decide what project you could do. Because of that situation, maybe half of the projects were psychology or sociology. You'd study the group itself because you got a controlled group.
So you said that lasted for 4 years?
Yeah, it lasted for 4 years. And I was traveling that whole time, 4 years, got a little burned out on it. And that's when I decided to get back to Texas.
Did you have something pulling you back to Texas beyond having started here, or was it kind of open-ended?
I love Texas.
All right.
My mother's family was all from the Rio Grande Valley, and my father's family was Yankee from Iowa. And I like I said, I enjoyed living in Iowa. But every Christmas, my idea of Christmas was palm trees and sandy beaches on South Padre Island.
All right.
And I kind of fell in love with that, frankly. And when I saw an opportunity to get out of education and get into business, I wanted to get into business. I need to get back to Texas. And I was trying to figure out how in the world would I do that. I don't have any money. Didn't make a lot of money doing that. It was a lot of fun, right? And then I had an offer to actually manage a country club in Dalhart.
Okay.
And so I came down to Dalhart, and I'm not a country clubber, Jason. You're going to find out from this discussion that it's not my class. However, I needed partners, and I got to thinking, country club Saturday afternoon. 6 months I had partners, and I was in business in Dalhart.
Did you have sort of an idea business-wise beyond the connections of a country club?
Other than the fact that I like to travel, and the first business I got into was alfalfa hay, and then I got involved in the National Hay Association and going overseas to trade shows and tried to accomplish things in exporting of alfalfa hay out of Dalhart. Very proud of two things that we managed to do. One is we got into the Queen's Trainer in England.
Okay.
And the byword at the time was Australian oats and Texas hay. and that was our doing. And then also I was one of the first, if not the first and only, exporter to export alfalfa hay directly to a Japanese dairy without going through a trading company.
All right.
Because Japanese trading companies are notorious for being the in-between for everything that goes into Japan. And that was a very fun thing to do, too. It took years to develop. It was a fun thing to do.
I want to talk about that because I imagine there are some listeners who don't know, thinking about exporting hay from Dalhart, to the UK or to Japan, like that there is demand for the kind of hay grown here in Texas or the Midwest for racehorses in Australia or something like that, right?
I'll tell you a funny story about that. The first trade show I went to was in Verona, Italy. Northern Italy, most people don't realize, there's a lot of German speakers in northern Italy, and they tend to be dairymen. And they tend to have a dairy where they grow their own feed and make their own cheese. And they have their own coolers, and maybe they sell their fancy cheese once a year or something like that. But they can't put up green hay. They don't have that kind of climate.
Okay.
I took a bale of hay, 110 pounds, and actually came out of Oklahoma, came out of the Oklahoma Panhandle. I shipped it to Verona, set it on a card table, and over a period of 4 days, those Italians ate it. At the end of the show, I was able to just scratch off the top and sweep it into a garbage can because they had to taste it. Italians really are fun. They're very expressionistic.
Yeah.
Throw their arms in the air. Oh, you colored it. It's green. Or you grew it in under glass, or you grew it in a greenhouse. And so they taste it, trying to figure out what we did to it. They would cut hay, and then maybe a week or 10 days later, they might get to put it up after it rained on it numerous times. And so it was brown. And they never seen nice green alfalfa hay that was perfect. And there's a very good need for that because what they were paying for their hay, growing it themselves, was outrageous.
It's better to export it from the other side of the world.
Cheaper. We can grow things in the Texas Panhandle. We can grow almost anything here cheaper than anybody else in the world. Just a matter of getting it there. And back in those days, container shipping that direction was very cheap.
Okay. So that was in what? Early
that
80s
been
at this
in 84,
point? Okay.
84, 83, 84, when we got into that. And then we would compress bales. And in Japan, American exporters tend to, well, this is what we have. This is what you better buy from me. As opposed to, what do you need? I'll grow it for you. Right. So in the process of traveling in Japan, even on that expedition that I was on, I could see unloading 1-ton bales of hay, compressed and put into a container from the west coast of the United States. But the Japanese are picking it up with a 3-wheeled pickup. 500 pounds would tip it over.
Yeah, that's not going to fit very well.
That 1 ton made no sense to them. So we figured out how to press chopped hay into a 50-pound sack and then wrap it in 50-pound sacks and ship it over. They love that because they can pick it up and take it to the dairy. Japanese dairy typically has cattle from Wisconsin. Now picture big Wisconsin dairy Holstein cattle that are used to eating grain grass and fresh alfalfa hay. And the only thing Japan has to feed them is what they cut out of their bar ditches or what they import from China, which is mostly straw. And then they try to add something to it to give it a little bit of protein. So that's the way we ought to be doing it here. We ought to ask the world, what do you want us to grow? Man, we'll
make it happen here.
Yeah, we can make it happen. We can grow anything.
How long did that export sort of thing work for you?
Lasted about 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
And then finally the trading companies decided to get together, and they couldn't get their hay off the port because the port was unionized with the trading companies.
Okay.
And that put it in.
So that kind of that took individual suppliers, maybe like you, and made it to where it was big corporations were kind of running the show.
As soon as we shipped the first load over with the 50-pound sacks, the trading companies started showing up in Amarillo with their cameras. Mitsubishi walks in and says, we want to buy hay from you. I said, well, I'm sorry, I already have a customer. So I wanted the customer to be the dairyman, not Mitsubishi.
Got it. Okay.
Or Mitsui.
So then you had to pivot, do something else.
Yeah, and that's when we discovered something very interesting. And this was in 1992. I was working with, I was on the governor of Kansas Committee for Value-Added Products at the time. And
Sounds fun.
I was working in Manhattan, Kansas, and we discovered that certain varieties of sorghum vulgare, commonly referred to here as Milo,
Okay.
under certain circumstances and processed properly, becomes a natural plastic. Now, what I mean by a natural plastic, a plastic is anything that can be formed or molded.
Okay.
Now, over the last couple decades, we've come to think of plastics as petrochemicals. Petrochemicals make a plastic, but so do natural things like soy or corn, like starch. Amylose is also a plastic is anything that can be formed or molded and hold its shape.
Okay.
Extruded sorghum is a natural plastic. It takes a little bit of education because we think of plastics like we think of Kleenex as facial tissue. Nobody says, hand me a facial tissue. You say, hand me a Kleenex.
Sure.
And it might be a puff, right?
Yeah.
It's a matter of marketing. Marketing is what it's all about in business here.
When you say extruded sorghum, what does extruded mean in that context?
Extruded means you take a dry product and you take a large stream of it and you force it through a very small hole at a very high rate of speed, which creates a tremendous amount of pressure and heat. Pressure and heat causes certain starches to explode inside a tube so that when it hits that little hole, it puffs up, makes little puffs.
Okay.
So the first thing we tried making was packing material, biodegradable packing material. Started in 1992, and it started at Kansas State and Colby, Kansas. I was working in Colby, Kansas at the time because we had a sunflower investment up there where we were growing sunflowers and sending them to Israel. And so on a Kansas farm, let me throw a plug for Kansas farmers, Jason. There's no better engineer if you're trying to do it efficiently than a Kansas farmer, because every one of them's a welder, a fabricator. He's got a scrap iron place out back the barn somewhere, and he can build anything. Just very, very inventive guys. So one of my partners at the time, a Kansas farmer, invented a way to put all this together and experiment with it. And then Kansas State Extrusion Lab, which is the premier extrusion lab in the world, primarily because the two largest extruder manufacturers in the world are in Sabetha, Kansas, right down the road from them. All right. And that developed into a company called Biofoam. And Biofoam manufactured through extrusion processes a natural biodegradable
so
material.
Something similar to like a packing peanut.
That is a packing peanut.
Packing peanut, literally. But it's not made out of what we think of styrofoam. It's made out of leftover products from
It's
Milo.
made out of Milo or corn.
Okay.
The difference between making it out of Milo and corn is price. When you get into natural products, the first thing you ask is, well, what does it cost? Mm-hmm. I was introduced a number of years ago in an extrusion laboratory in Dallas to a place setting made out of cornstarch, a cup, a plate, knife, fork, spoon, everything that you could use for a place setting out of nothing but cornstarch.
Okay.
Right? It's gorgeous. It was white. It was pretty. It was stiff. I said, what does it cost? He said, well, we figure it'll be about $17. And I started laughing. Who's going to buy a $17 thing you're going to use once?
Yeah, I was going to say, because it's biodegradable, right?
That's right. Maybe at the White House, maybe? I mean, this is ridiculous. And I always laugh at professors have a tendency to not see anything that's practical. Mm-hmm. So our company's motto is we make an all-natural product affordable.
Okay.
And if it's not going to be affordable, at least reasonably so, then we'll go make something else. Because we make lots of things out of plastic.
And so, just so listeners know that, those packing peanuts made of Milo, as opposed to the polystyrene kind that, will break into bits and bits and bits forever, doesn't really degrade. These are biodegradable.
Absolutely.
At some point. They're all natural.
Yeah, we would make a little flyer to throw in a box when a customer package that says, this is a biodegradable product. Throw it in the landfill or throw it out under your lawn.
Stick it in your compost pile.
Yeah, stick it in your compost pile. It's high in nitrogen and very good for the garden.
When you're making it, is it byproducts from Milo, or are you growing Milo just for the purpose of...
Here's the secrets there, Jason. All Milo doesn't do this.
Okay.
Very few varieties of Milo do this. And that's the intellectual property, patented stuff involved in our company. which ones to use and why.
Okay.
Basically, if you use the right one and you remove the protein and the fat from it mechanically, then what you're left with in the case of Milo is a pectin. And a pectin starch is very different than an amylose starch. An amylose starch is smooth, like a wife uses in the kitchen. It's like a paste if you add water to it. Okay. But a pectin starch is like a sandpaper if you add water to it. It'll clean your hands off. Very different, which means it doesn't want to go through that extrusion process that I described, which means that if you force it, it explodes.
Okay.
That's a bad term saying it explodes, but it expands significantly. It expands 50 to 1.
Wow. So you developed the product, and then was that the primary use? Was packing peanuts, packing materials?
Initially, it was packing material, and the reason is packing material was easy to get into.
Okay.
The packing material market in North America is roughly at that time $150, $200 million total market, and nobody else was doing it correctly.
This was still in the 90s.
This
right?
was
before
in the 90s.
Amazon, before everything was.
This was in the 90s.
Shipped.
We would go to a trade show, and there might be half a dozen other companies advertising cornstarch products. Mm-hmm. The problem with cornstarch products is they were starting with a 65-cent a pound product. We were starting with a 15-cent a pound product. It just wasn't practical. Plus, the sorghum we were using does not require polymers, and that's the key. Cornstarch does not expand into a plastic without a polymer. So when you see, well, this is made out of corn, for example, garbage bags that have a little bit of corn, and they tout it as being recycled, being properly environmentally correct.
Plus other stuff.
But it's corn plus other stuff.
Yeah.
And that leads us into a discussion that is very, very popular in my company, and that is the true definition of things. Like I said, plastic. Mm-hmm. Another true definition we ought to consider is biodegradable. Biodegradable does not mean water soluble. But to most American consumers, they're the same thing. Well, I put it in the sink, add water to it, and it goes away. Well, arsenic then is biodegradable.
Yeah.
There's another one is recycled. You know, what does recycled mean? Well, it means you do something twice. I was actually in a polystyrene manufacturer years ago where he was showing me around his packing material. Mm-hmm. He had a large overhead hanging bag full of packing peanuts, and they were curing. Once they cured, they were fed down onto a 4-foot wide conveyor with no sides on it. And that went up 20 feet, dropped into a bagging bin, and the boys there bagging. Well, all the way up, it was a popcorn popper. It was coming off on both sides because there was no sides on it. And then he had a couple of his workers pushing it with a snow shovel back and putting it back in the hopper, recycled on the bag, 20 cents a cubic foot more, and laughed all the way to the bank. Huh. That's unfortunate in my view. This is where maybe the Europeans have it over on us. So we use ISO definitions, European definitions for words. When we say biodegradable, we do it by ISO. That means capable of being consumed by bacteria 100% to the point of no toxic residue.
Okay.
Water soluble is something that turns into a different form when it gets wet.
Yeah, it just kind of melts.
Not biodegradable. Okay. Yeah.
Tell me how long, because I know that those packing peanuts from the 90s kind of allowed your business model to evolve into what MILEX is today. But what was the process there? How did that work?
We started out with enough money to build a couple of plants. By plants, I mean extrusion locations. Mm-hmm. The platform goes like this. You grow the Milo, you bring it to a raw material factory. The raw material factory mechanically turns that farmer crop into a natural resin that can extrude.
Okay.
But it doesn't weigh anything when it's extruded. In fact, it weighs nothing.
Yeah.
So you can't ship it very far. The cost would kill you. So you have a raw material plant and an extrusion plant wherever the market is, as close to the market as possible. Means multiple extrusion locations. About 1996, 97, there were 16 plants around the United States, mostly on the coast area where most of the shipping is done. I built 16 plants myself for somebody else.
Right. Because
we'd sell a protected territory and they would buy in and then they'd buy the raw material from us and we'd show them how to do it and we'd sell them the equipment and so on. And it was going really fast, growing really fast, we're gaining market share. And by 2010, Sealed Air Corporation out of New York was my biggest competitor in polystyrene. And I knew the president of their division because at trade shows, we'd go out and have lunch and kid each other. He walked into my office. It was in Irving at the time, totally unannounced. Man, I'm so tired of competing with you guys. What would it take to buy you out? So we sold the exclusive rights to make packing material to Sealed Air Corporation in 2010. In 2016, they sold the same exclusive rights to Storopack out of Frankfurt. So today, all the biodegradable loose packing material in the world was the original MILEX.
Wow.
Now, they've added a lot of corn to it. They use a lot of corn. They use a lot of polymers trying to make it prettier. We were very cautious about that because we were biodegradable. We wanted to stay that way.
Yeah.
They're not. They're water soluble.
Okay.
But if you walk into a U-Haul or into Office Depot today and see packing peanuts, little puffed up peanuts, that was started with MILEX.
Okay.
Now they call it something else because that was our term. We always knew the time that we were making packing material that we could make other things. And what we jumped into right away after that was insulation. Because I said packing material, $150, $200 million market. Insulation at the time, $8.5 to $9 billion market.
Wow.
And growing very fast, mostly in North America. So that's the introduction to insulation when we sold the rights to the packing material.
And is it pretty much the same process to make the packing material versus
It's pretty much the same process.
You're just selling this application of the same raw material.
We changed the size a little bit to
Okay.
be more efficient. We changed the weight a little bit. It's a little bit heavier than the packing material because in packing material you're just shipping.
Yeah,
weight.
you're just putting in a building.
But we want it to be stable. We want it to be long lasting. In fact, we offer a lifetime guarantee that it's going to stay there as long as it's not wet, right? Consequently, it's a little bit heavier to add strength, but really it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
And so you started a new company called MILEX.
We started a new company. Frankly, what the buy from Sealed Air did was pay all the debt that it cost us to develop that. It was very expensive to develop that. And Sealed Air paid all that off. And now we said, okay, let's do something else. They bought the raw material factory that was located in Pampa at the time that went with that. And so we need another factory.
Okay.
We need $500,000 to buy another factory. And we had we being the people that were involved in it initially. And the farmers that have been growing for us were very interested. So we joined with the farmers and created a new company called Milo Insulation.
Okay.
And the farmers contributed money, and we contributed know-how and equipment and patents. And now where are we going to put a new factory? So we started looking around. I'm a big fan of old steel buildings that most people in the Texas Panhandle think are worthless, and they're just everywhere.
We got a lot of them. Yep.
And we ended up finding one in Tulia. Consequently, the current company is located in Tulia, Texas, because there was 130,000 square feet of steel building affordable. So we moved in there, rebuilt the raw material factory, started a new company called Milo Insulation, and that was in 13-14 in that time period.
Okay.
Right in there.
And that company still exists?
That company
continues
it still exists. It's expanded a number of times. The company that I'm here representing is Milo Insulation of Texas, and that's a small group of investors that takes that raw material and builds the extrusion plants.
Okay.
And we are just starting this month a franchising operation. We're going to franchise that. When we first started, I calculated there's room for 125, 150 extrusion plants in the United States, and then we hired the professionals to look at it. They're saying 450 to 500.
Wow.
Which would make a pretty good size.
But it's the same sort of thing. They take that raw material that you provide them, they create the insulation, and
we
then
we would sell a protected territory where we would guarantee that nobody else could make it within a certain territory. We don't tell people where they can sell because freight determines that. And then we help them, sell them the raw material, and we join forces to create MILEX, which is the brand name that we go by. MILEX may be the insulation of the future because it is an alternative to fiberglass and cellulose that have their detractors for what reason, one reason or another. Cellulose has gotten kind of expensive for lack of used paper, And fiberglass tends to be a little itchy.
Yeah, yeah.
So installers tell me, and MILEX is neither one.
Tell me what's the reputation of MILEX? Like, is it growing within the building community? Or
MILEX started in Tulia, expanded to Denton, and then to Oklahoma City, and then to Austin. And today you can get MILEX anywhere from Perryton to Bryan College Station.
Okay.
And it's shipped from those 4 places. We think there's room for another maybe 6 or 8 in Texas. I think Tyler would be a good location, San Antonio, the other side of Austin, maybe 3 around Dallas-Fort Worth. We only have the 1. And it's expanded very rapidly. By this time, it's in a couple thousand homes, and we almost have a 5-star rating at Angie's List.
Yeah.
We have a couple of detractors, both of them kind of funny. One of them was a fellow in St. Angelo. They got mad at me because we wouldn't go to St. Angelo. It's just too far. We can't get there for him.
A bad review.
Give us a 1.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
They won't come to my house. And another one because they thought it was too expensive, even though this particular person would think anything was probably too expensive.
Do you have to go out and sort of sell it to the construction community? Say, these are the benefits, this is why you might choose this?
We're doing very little in construction. Most of it is what we call retrofit.
Okay, so people who have an existing house and they want
According to the United States government, 5.3 million American homes every year re-insulate from insulation that has shrunk.
Yeah.
It lost its effectiveness over a period of time. Most insulation that's installed, 10 years, it's starting 15 years, 20, 25 years, you haven't insulated. You don't have any insulation. You just got dust up there. And MILEX, on the other hand, doesn't do that.
Okay.
Because the expansion in the extrusion process captures the air inside the pieces instead of between the pieces. Other insulation traps air.
Okay.
MILEX makes air inside the pieces, and that's why it lasts longer.
Do you blow it in like
any
other insulation?
You can blow it in with the same equipment, although we use specialized equipment that we developed ourselves because it's much faster and more efficient. We never compress it. It's delivered in a large gooseneck trailer behind a pickup, and we can do about a 3,000 square foot house without going back up to an R38.
All right.
The R factor of MILEX is about 3.2, 3.25, which means that an R38 recommended for our area is 12 inches deep. So a cubic foot and a square foot in a house is the same. It's easy to figure. So if you got a 2,000 square foot house, you need 2,000 cubic feet to bring it up to an R38.
And that R factor is just how well it insulates a house.
The R factor is a formula on how much it prevents the transfer of heat.
Okay. And is most of the Milo for this product still grown in this area? Are you having to bring in any from other parts of the state or Midwest?
The primary growing area for the Milo that we use is the Texas Panhandle.
Okay.
Kansas is an excellent growing area, but we don't need Kansas yet. As we expand, my intention would be to move north into Kansas. Kansas is the largest producing state. In Texas, there's growing areas here. There's growing areas in central Texas. We have members of our association around Waco, down to Temple, and even on down into the valley as needed. But that's requires a little bit different type of Milo. Mm-hmm. Once you get outside of this area of the high plains, then you lose the advantage. The advantage here is that Milo is the right crop for us to grow here. We're probably going to get into this a little bit later, but it requires so much less water.
Right.
And we've got a water problem in this part of the country. Corn, if it gets dry, it dies.
Yeah.
Milo, if it gets dry, it goes dormant. It'll just sit there. It'll sit there and 100-degree, 5.
It doesn't die.
It doesn't die. It just sits there. Then when it rains, it comes on again.
Okay.
And requires very low input, seeds very low, so it's an efficient crop for our farmers to grow. Our farmers are loyal to us because we pay the farmer a premium over what Milo would normally sell if they just grow our variety and keep it separate. Very important to us that the variety is kept identified.
All right.
We have to have the right variety.
How is Milo used otherwise, if they're not growing it specifically for your use? It's like feed for cattle.
It's a feed for cattle in our country. In most of the world, sorghum is a food. In fact, by far, the largest portion of bread in the world is made out of sorghum and not wheat. But here what happened is when the Europeans were moving west in the United States and they come to the great American desert that stretches all the way from El Paso to the Canadian border. Right?
Yeah.
What do we grow here? We have special problems. We have wind. We're on the middle of every migratory bird route that comes this way.
Yep.
And we're dry or we're wet. You never know which.
Sometimes the same week.
Yeah. Average rainfall in the Texas Panhandle doesn't mean a thing, really, because you could have 10 inches, but all at once.
Yeah.
And it didn't do a lot of good. So what do we do about that? So the United States government assigned that problem to the ag schools, such as Texas A&M, Kansas State, Colorado State, Oklahoma State. And those people started working on it, Iowa State. And what they did is they took a sorghum that at that time grew 10 feet tall, and they bred it down to where it was 3-4 feet tall. They took a head at the top of the sorghum that opened up like a flower so birds could land on it, and they genetically reduced it down to where it's a tight little head.
Okay.
So birds don't sit on it. There's no place to sit. That tight little berry is very resistant to bugs and disease and birds and things like that. And in the process of doing all that, they created a hybrid that's unlike any other. You could eat American sorghum as we know it, Milo, but it's not the most efficient.
Right.
There are food-grade varieties of sorghum, but they're still the old shape, the old size, with a swollen berry that's easy to break. Our Milo, you lay it on a concrete, drive it over with a tractor, you don't crack much. It's a very, very tough crop. And frankly, it's the best crop for our farmers for those reasons. It grows and it still produces well here.
I want to close the section. I'm always interested in how a place, the personality, the culture, the environment of a place, like impacts business, entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. You've done so many different things. You've been involved with Milo, for 3 decades at this point.
Yeah.
Beyond just the capacity for manufacturing facilities, like how has the Texas Panhandle influenced what you do, what you've created?
Everything we need to succeed in our business is centered in the Texas Panhandle. From the buildings that I mentioned, type of buildings that are available and affordable, to farmers that need an alternative crop that makes a good rotation for their corn or their cotton, to a crop that uses a lot less water and helps us solve our water problems that we have here, to available labor that in our small communities, centered around Amarillo especially, where there's a job shortage. It was an excellent place to do this. And then the climate allows us to grow a crop every year, pretty much, the exception of the 1 year I mentioned.
Yeah, you mentioned 2011,
we take care of that by just stretching out our growing area, not just right here. To expand it in the future, it would go north.
Are you surprised to have found yourself here?
No.
I mean, from Iowa to South Texas?
I'm not surprised at all, because this is the best of both worlds. Iowa's too cold. The Rio Grande Valley's too hot.
Here we have both, right?
Here we have both. I prefer higher altitude, like we were talking earlier, cool mornings, warm afternoons, maybe mostly a moderate climate like that, and that's what this crop needs. This crop needs. It likes hot. Where I grew up in Iowa, that's corn country. Frankly, that's where corn ought to grow.
Yeah.
Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Kansas, irrigated and non-irrigated even. Corn is an excellent crop for those boys. Down here, corn uses an awful lot of water, as does alfalfa. And I was in that alfalfa business, but we're drawing down our aquifer a little bit, maybe too quick.
So the Texas Panhandle is a little bit of a sweet spot then for what you need to do.
Yes, it is. And my wife's from here originally. But I would have probably ended up here anyway because of those factors.
This episode is supported by Amarillo Angels. Nationally, more than 1 in 5 foster youth become homeless after age 18. That's such an incredibly bleak statistic, and you've heard guests talk about it on this podcast. But Amarillo Angels is changing that reality here in the Texas Panhandle. They walk alongside children, youth, and families who are experiencing foster care, offering community, connection, and care through the Love Box and Dare to Dream programs. Every child deserves to feel supported, and with your help, Amarillo Angels can make that happen. Visit AmarilloAngels.org to learn how you can get involved, whether it's volunteering, donating, or simply spreading the word. Together, we can make a lasting impact. That's AmarilloAngels.org. Okay, I'm back with Tom Martin. Tom, this is part of the show I call 8 Straight. 8 Straight is sponsored every week by Panhandle Plains Historical Museum and Canyon. It's the largest history museum in Texas. And coming up in October is a new exhibit, the 2024 Regional Art Faculty Show, which highlights the work of art faculty from Amarillo College, West Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Angelo State, several other universities, all hosted and curated by Panhandle Plains. I know we think of it as a history museum, but its art collection is pretty legendary, and you can see a lot of that on display until 2025. Okay, first question. When you think of the Panhandle area 10 years from now, what do you hope for?
I hope that by then we've done something to at least begin to alleviate our water problem. That leads me into what I would call better crop utilization.
Okay.
What do we grow? How better to grow it? Certainly, Extension Service is helping the guys with that. When I first came down here, we were shooting water 20 feet in the air, letting half of it evaporate before it comes down in the crop. Now we got it right down in the crop, for example. We're using hybrids that require less water. We're using a better rotation procedure. And I think 10 years from now, we'll get much better at that.
I think a lot of people don't realize, like just you talking about how the hybrids of sorghum or Milo developed, they don't realize the agricultural innovation that is required here to meet some of the challenges of living here. And all those things that you talk about, the way that you irrigate, the crops you grow, like that's smart people figuring out how can we do this more efficiently.
Right.
Okay, other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
Strong winter storms.
Yeah.
I thought about that for a while when you asked me that. I thought, I've been through a lot of blizzards. I remember missing school for 3 weeks in a row in Iowa back in '61. But I can tell you the worst blizzard I've ever been in was in Dalhart, Texas.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because there was a lot of snow. It was because there was too much wind with it.
Okay.
And we had huge drifts, and 87 was basically closed. And 287 and 87 were dangerous.
Do you remember what year that was?
That was in the early 80s. I'm thinking
Okay.
81, around in there. I lived on the edge of town and had to take a four-wheel drive tractor and go out and rescue people. And it was a terrible storm because you couldn't see a thing with a 60-mile-an-hour wind.
Yeah.
Even though the flat fields were clear. It blew off the field.
We think of those blowing in from Canada, a massive northern air. Does the wind not blow in Iowa like it blows here? Does it kind of funnel down here and gets?
It doesn't blow in Iowa like it does
Okay.
here. Partly because there's a lot more to stop it.
Okay.
and partly it's because of the weather patterns of the country at large. You're coming down off the mountains. And what we have here is it would be very difficult, I think, to be a weather predictor here. Mm-hmm. Because when the time we're talking about, say, in November, maybe in February and March, those fronts come down and they stall out. And they might stall out in Dalhart, or they might stall out in Channing, or they might stall out in Lubbock. You just don't know. And where they stall out is going to be the difference between a 60-mile-an-hour wind and a sunny day.
Wow.
And that's very difficult to handle. In Iowa, what we had was snow 3 times a week, mostly gently coming down and building up, and then a little wind come to drift it, and really good snow removal equipment, which we also don't have here. The tendency here is, well, if we wait a couple of days, it'll melt.
It'll blow away or it'll melt
So just tell everybody stay put.
Okay. What does this area not have enough of?
Water and greenery.
Yeah.
We keep going back to water, but I do like greenery.
Yeah. We're not Iowa in that
One
regard.
of my favorite places in North America is Vancouver, Canada.
Oh, man, yeah.
Vancouver, Canada is just lush, and it's way up north. But even in the wintertime, you got pretty flowers, you got vegetables fresh every day, and I would like to see more of that. I don't know what we do about it here, but that's what we don't have enough of. And we're going to figure out how to better utilize our water, and we'll be all right on that. But as our population grows here, water's going to be a serious problem.
Okay. What's your favorite local restaurant?
You're going to laugh at this probably, but I'd say Ranch House.
Okay.
Ranch House is in Canyon. I'm an early riser, and breakfast is on my agenda every day. And I've tried breakfast restaurants everywhere, and the Ranch House restaurant has an outstanding breakfast.
I've had
I guess I
breakfast
just
there before.
put a plug in for them, but that's probably my favorite.
Okay. Are you there like on a regular basis?
I'm there on
weekday mornings?
Pretty regular basis. Anytime I go to Tulia from here, our main offices are here, our plant's in Tulia. Anytime I go that way, I'm going to stop in the ranch.
Okay. What's the most underrated aspect of living here in the Panhandle?
People don't realize the advantage of open spaces. You go to a city and you just can't see anything. You stop and think about it. Any place but here, you can't see anything. The sunsets are beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just so wide open. It's an atmosphere made by God, and it's hard to duplicate it.
You've traveled a lot. Do you get sort of that itchy kind of feeling when you're in an urban area, can't see the horizon?
Oh yes.
You feel walled in by.
I don't like to be walled in. If I'm going to be walled in, I want a nice, tight, little, safe wall around me.
Yeah.
And I don't enjoy the big cities. Amarillo has the best mix of a city large enough to have what you need, but not so large as to have the Houston or Austin traffic.
Yeah. I think I've always found I don't recognize how much I need a horizon until I don't have a horizon. There's trees in the way, there's buildings in the way, whatever it is. I'm always ready to come back here.
Yeah, you feel antsy.
What's your favorite local nonprofit?
I'm impressed with Faith City Mission.
Okay.
Those guys seem to do a really good job down there. I occasionally take some stuff down, drop it off down there and stuff. And Amarillo's done a pretty good job of that. Now, we have our share of homeless, but they seem to come on along I-40.
Yeah.
Anywhere along I-40, you're gonna have some homeless. And I just think Faith City Mission does an outstanding job of that without enough praise.
They've been doing it for a long time, too.
Yeah.
Very consistent. This is a new question, but I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite drive or day trip in the area?
That's a good question. I enjoy going from Claude to Silverton.
Okay.
You get on the Highway 70 in Claude and you go down through the canyon. As you come up out of the canyon on the south side, there's an overlook picnic area there. That's my Texas Panhandle Mecca.
Okay.
I can go there and ease a lot of tensions. The other one might be from Silverton over to Lakeview, because that's an even prettier drive. It's just a little farther for me to go. I like to see the canyons, so that's my favorite drive.
I feel like, that's a lesser experienced part of the canyon. It's the same system, but a lot fewer people think about that or drive
they
that.
don't ever go that way because they go 86.
I used to do a road race that was through that stretch of the canyon.
I rode part of that in the when we had our centennial wagon train.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I rode from Lakeview to Turkey. Got into Turkey in time for the Will's days.
Yeah, okay. That's a great suggestion. Last question. When was the last time you visited Palo Canyon?
I do all the time. Last week.
Really?
My favorite thing is go down and have a hamburger down at the restaurant in the bottom and just drive through the canyon. I own a lot in Sunday Canyon down there.
Do you?
Someday I'm going to build a house overlooking the canyon. You really can't quite get close enough to it to stay there, but Sunday Canyon is a grandfathered area where you can do that. I'd like to do that. So Palo Duro Canyon is always on my list. If anybody from out of town that's never been here comes to town, I'm going to take them to Palo Duro. I don't want them to leave here with the idea. Customers of mine when I was in packaging material, for example, out east or west, you're from Amarillo. Oh, big Texan. Or snowstorm, one or the other. They were either stranded here in a snowstorm or they stopped and tried to eat a big steak. Those are the two things that Amarillo is most famous for. And I really think it ought to be Palo Duro.
Yeah, you try to give them a little bit.
I want to see it
deeper.
And if it's in the summertime, I'm going to take them to the play.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. Makes you proud to be local.
Okay. That concludes my 8 straight questions. I like to close by asking my guests to endorse something. So what's one thing you would like listeners to know about or to experience?
Well, this is interesting, but before you even pulled it in your commercial there, Panhandle Plains Museum is one of the best museums I've ever been in. I highly recommend that. If any of your listeners have never been to Panhandle Plains, plan a whole day.
Yeah.
You can't see it in less than a day. And so you're going to want to see everything down there. It's a fantastic museum. It's my favorite.
Do you have a part of the collection that you find yourself drawn back to?
Oh, yes. I'm a historian. I like to write books. I've got a couple published history books. And so the early days, Indian days, I find fascinating. Just recently, we insulated a house down in Palo Duro Canyon, right where Colonel Mackenzie shot the horses.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the house we did was built right after that. And I got to talking to him, and one of the old boys there remembered his great-grandfather telling him how that happened.
It's part of the Red River War, which
part of the Red River War.
This fall is the 150th anniversary of it.
I'm working on a book for that.
Are you?
Right now, doing the research. I enjoy the research on that.
All right. That's a fantastic endorsement. Tom Martin, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes the episode. I want to say thanks to Tom for the interview. You can learn more about his business at miloinsulation.com. Thanks also to Amarillo Angels and Panhandle Plains Historical Museum for supporting the podcast, and to Angelina Marie for editing every week. And thank you for listening. Hey Amarillo exists on a weekly basis because of listeners like you and the local people who support it financially through patreon.com/HeyAmarillo. Hey Amarillo's executive producers include Patrick Burns, Jason Burr, Katie Linger, Corey Burns, Josh Wood, Wes Reeves, Cindy Graham, and Barbara and Jim Whitten. This has been episode 372. My name is Jason Boyett, and I'll see you next week.